discuss in this episode, seemingly not getting far at all. The section takes the form of an almost hard-boiled narration. Its terse sentences and plot development owe more to the detective genre or investigative journalism rather than what we think of as literary fiction. But since this is a Roberto Bolaño novel, these forms are used to ask questions about the problem of representation. How can you tell a story about something like the femicides, and more importantly, how can you make it a true story rather than a false one? By the end of this section, Fate has no more understanding of the evil in Santa Teresa than the characters of the previous sections, but he has managed to save a single person. That is, if the events of this section have occurred at all, and are not just the daydreams of one Quincy Williams, a man asleep on a couch in the apartment of his mother who has just passed away. Quick note, there is a character in this section named Barry Seaman who is loosely based on the actual Bobby Seale, one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party. We get a little confused during the episode and call him both Barry Seale and Bobby Seaman. We apologize for the confusion. Don't forget to give us a follow on Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod, on YouTube at the Infinite Library Podcast, and wherever you get your podcasts. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Man, this is a weird part of the book.
I know, right? Yeah.
This is not what I expected.
Yeah, I have I have my thesis statement, but at the same time I was like thinking about this section, and I'm going to say for when we start, but like I realized that my experience reading this section has been, I think, incredibly different this time. And I'll go into why, but there's something about, like how creepy and insubstantial, but also like politically minded a lot of the stuff is. Like it's, I don't know, it's quite interesting. So
this is like the first part where like I kind of found myself feeling a little overwhelmed by the book. Because like the first two sections, I was having a blast. I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna stop myself from reading all of this. Like just, straight through. Yeah. And then like I got to this part and there's like just all like the weird speeches like about food and stuff.
Yeah, the artichoke recipe, which I've tried before. I need to actually just cook it. Maybe I'll cook that when I get to. I'll make that part of my diet because it looks like a good recipe. But.
Yeah, I know. But there's something like creepy about it. And it's got this like almost like droning quality to it.
Yeah.
Where like you aren't sure how much you're even how deeply you're supposed to be reading it. Like, I don't mean like Bolaño's wasting your time, just like what's the cadence here, Yeah,
and then like a lot of really horrifying things are hinted at, but I realize they're never actually shown in this section. And I think in the past I've read it and been like, oh, okay, they're getting to the bottom of this. But then in this section, it's like he might not have even gotten to the bottom of anything. It's like
he might have just completely overreacted.
And
made like a total ass out of himself.
Right. And even when they try to call Rosa, and it's like Rosa's dead, or not Rosa, the other girl, whose name I think is also Rosa. And they're like, I think
it's Rosa Amalfitano and Rosa Mendez.
Rosa Mendez. Like, I think Rosa's dead, and it's like, but she just didn't pick up the phone. It's like when I read that, you're like, oh yeah, she's dead. It's like, but we don't really know that. Well,
and it's like, I don't know. We kind of almost don't have a reason to trust Rosa Amalfitano because it's like, both your parents are crazy people. I kind of realized that reading this section, like, oh yeah, like her mom was crazy too. Like they're both crazy people.
And then
different ways.
And he's just like, check out this cool disc. Like, see, the guy thinks he's strapped and he's not. And it's like, and everyone's just like looking at the dad like he's an insane person. Yeah, and then there's like the what is it? The Muhammad brothers? Or not what are they called? The political group. The Mohammedan Brotherhood. Yeah.
Brotherhood, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also realized, like, and I'm sure we'll get to this as we were discussing, but I just want to bring it up now. I feel like this is one of the first times I have ever read a book with an African American protagonist that was not just written by not a black guy, but not by an American at all. I don't want to be like, oh, Bolaño's racist, but like you can kind of tell, like, oh, Bolaño didn't like hang out with a lot of like American black people, and he's mostly like going off of like pop culture, like lefty pop culture things he knows about, like the Panthers,
and then like the mise en scene, the shit, man, the atmosphere. Like that's like,
it's like blaxploitation movies he saw as a teenager, and yeah, like this feels, it feels like almost a little Tarantino-esque.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that's a good call though, because I thought of that, and then there's the David Lynch reference. So it's like I feel like 90s cinema is a good that makes sense to me.
Well, I almost feel like Bolaño is winking at us a little bit, where it's like I don't think he's, like I said, I don't think he's racist. I don't think that he's like, oh, this is what black people are like. Yeah. I think it's supposed to kind of serve as another like kind of signal that like, oh, there's something weird going on here in terms of like, is this real? Is this a dream?
Yeah. And that was like why I asked you that, like 3-4 weeks ago, when I said like, there might be this implication that it's all a dream, but I don't know if it's like a solid enough implication. But
and it's one of those things where like, I don't know if it matters. I feel like kind of one of the questions this book is asking is like, is any of this real? Is all of this a dream? When are we in quote unquote reality? Yeah. What happened, like at what point are people attached or detached to reality? And he's asking that in kind of different modalities with the critics. It's I think most straightforward in like a political sense, where it's like, oh, these people live in like bourgeois fantasy world. And then Amalfitano is kind of more in the like, oh, he's literally like having a psychotic break. And then Oscar is much stranger.
Yeah, and is somehow able to get closer, but then at the same point, maybe not close at all. The act of getting Rosa out seems to be the good, like an overall good, but at the same time, it's like hard to determine exactly what happened. The way that the ending made me feel, it was kind of like, have you ever played a video game where you get the good ending, but then you find out like there's a secret real ending, and you have to do like a second playthrough to get the real ending? Yeah. Like there's like a false note in the good ending where it's like something doesn't quite add up. Yeah. So.
Yeah. This is my way of saying, welcome to the library, ladies and gentlemen. Or should I say, hombres y hermanas.
I'm your host, Ben.
I'm your host, Juan.
Juan Hagley. We have to assume pseudonyms because in this section, the main character assumes a pseudonym for reasons that are unclear. So you could be Juan Hagley and I could be Benito.
Well, we are back. We hope you enjoyed that cold open, whatever Ben chooses to cut it as cold open. We are here with part 2 of our series on Roberto Bolaño's 2666, in which we'll be talking about part 3 of Roberto Bolaño's 2666.
Yeah, the part about fate, because when we were cutting up the designations, I felt like parts 1 and 2 were like small enough to make one section, and then part 3 seems to be like in some ways equal to parts 1 and 2 combined. So we thought we would just look just at this section, and then just 4, and then just 5.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about the kind of layout for the series a couple days ago, and I did the thing I just did now where I said, we're recording part 2 about part 3. And I was trying to explain like, why we did it. And, at the end of the day, like it comes down to some degree, like to page count and like what made sense as we were breaking down like the schedule. But there is something I think to this part where there was part of it was like, what if we had done parts 1, 2, and 3 in one go, and then parts 4 and 5 as 2 additional episodes, because parts 4 and 5 are a good bit longer even than part 3.
Yeah, the bulk of the book. Yeah.
Yeah. I finished up the section, and like I literally like looked at it, vertically, and I was like, oh, I thought I was going to be a little further through this when we finish part 3. I was wrong. But there is something with this section where I really feel like we would have struggled, not just in terms of like fitting everything into one episode. I think that would have been difficult to do in even like a 2-hour long episode.
Right.
But I think that there is something to this section where it feels like it stands alone in a way that the previous 2 sections did not. I mean, I know that all the sections to some degree are meant to be capable of standing alone.
Right.
But
yeah.
I feel like parts 1 and 2 are kind of a piece in terms of what they're looking at and like the types of characters they're dealing with. Whereas part 3 feels like a pretty radical break in terms of the type of person we're following and what is happening, and kind of even just like the metaphysics of the story feel like they change pretty radically.
And the style is kind of different. This is almost like sort of a clipped, hard-boiled investigative journalism. The sentences are terser. Things are sort of, there's no like long off showboat sentences. There's not a lot of psychological complexity, although there is some, but he's clearly going for this kind of like hard boiled style. And I just wanted to follow up. You'd mentioned, just because it's worth repeating, we talked about it in the last episode, but Bolaño had at one point thought about releasing one of these parts as like its own book. And then, cause that would have been able to sell more copies. And, he had been, the story goes, turning to prose in order to provide for his family, but then they had made the decision that all of these parts work together as one book. But to your point, John, I agree that the character is different, the style is different, and it feels like we get closer to the heart of the book, but at the same time, we don't seem to get close at all, as we were kind of talking about in the intro. And so this particular part is quite perplexing in that way.
Yeah, I tried to do a little bit of background reading this week because I had time to. And I read a really great article on 2666. Unfortunately, I misplaced it before recording here, but I will make sure it is linked in the notes below the episode description. But basically, the author was making the claim that a big part of what this book is doing and why it is kind of what it is that Bolaño is, in a very postmodern fashion, each section is kind of him doing a riff on a different genre, and looking at kind of this setting through like 5 different sets of eyes and 5 different like hermeneutics for understanding reality and doing so.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly in this section, and I'm guessing the sections we're going to hit after this, there's a break here in terms of the fact that in parts 1 and 2, we were following different characters, but characters from a somewhat similar background, actually. We're following European academics in the New World who don't handle this Santa Teresa place too well. And part 3 really takes a radical shift there. Rather than following an academic, this time we're following a journalist. Rather than following Europeans, we are following an African-American. And, Bolaño was someone who I think knew the world of academia and kind of expatriates very well, even if he had some level of derision, at least for academics.
And to how short-sighted they can be as well. So
yeah. But this feels very different from the standpoint that this feels like the part about Fate feels like him really trying to tackle a type of character that is less familiar to him.
Yeah.
In a way that I found very interesting, because one thing Bolaño does is that, you know, in a lot of the books we've read, even if a character isn't necessarily a super straightforward like Bolaño stand-in, like it typically he's an author where it feels like his protagonists a lot of times have a lot of him in there, even if he has kind of magnified certain qualities to make that person different, maybe change their political valences a little bit, depending on what he's trying to explore.
Well, and like usually they're obsessed with reading or books. So that's also like a clear Bolaño nod. But yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, I think that's true of a lot of authors. That's not to put Bolaño down by any means. And I think if we squint, we can probably find a lot of Bolaño in our protagonist of Part 3, Oscar Fate. But like, it's really interesting. I said this before we started recording, depending on where Ben decides to put the cold open. But this is one of the first books I can think about that I've read that had a Black protagonist, a Black American protagonist that was written not just by someone who wasn't Black, but who isn't American, or Bolaño was Latin American, but not from the United States.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I'm sure Bolaño met plenty of Black people over the course of his life. I don't want to I'm not trying to say like he's racist or he's writing like a caricature or something like that, but he is like making a big choice in doing this. And I think we're going to talk more about like maybe what the relevance of that is for the story, he's trying to communicate, because it's a very big and a very deliberate choice.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And there's even, we'll get to it, a bit of a nod as to that he might be aware that he could be misconstrued in doing this, because there's a scene where Oscar remembers visiting the last communist in Brooklyn, who's a very old Black man, and he writes up the story, and people refer to it as just another adventure in the African-American picaresque. And I think in putting that in there, I think he's a bit nodding that like maybe people will assume that he's doing this, or that he's going to try not to do this. And I think that's kind of a bit of a reflexive awareness of this choice that he's made. And I also think, and we'll talk about it, that I think in relying on a kind of like hard-boiled detective style, he can sort of avoid getting too much into the psychology, even though it's hinted at, and focus more on the action, for lack of a better word. Although there isn't like a whole lot of action in this section, because it's mostly about him dealing with his mother dying, him handling this assignment where he's supposed to cover a boxing match in Santa Teresa, and the various complications he gets in after that. And I think if, in terms of like thus far, this is one of the more plot heavy sections. Although I guess maybe the part about the critics has some plot, because there is a love triangle, but this one has like a more reliance on like, then we're going to go investigate this, then this is going to happen. And I think in that way he can write this character without having to worry about like really capturing his consciousness, so to speak. So,
yeah, on the topic of the last communist in Brooklyn, I hope that when he died, it's the same day in, like 2015, when three young men named Felix, Will, and Matt got off a bus with microphones and big dreams, and all of a sudden there were three more communists in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I'm glad that you picked up on that, because the phrase like the last communist in Brooklyn is very interesting, given that this was written in 2004, because I feel like the communists in Brooklyn soon shot up after that.
And we're just as annoying.
Yeah. Yeah, if only he had a podcast in 2004.
This week on the Adam Friedland Show, the last communist in Brooklyn.
Yeah. What was his name? Scottsboro Boy? Yeah, Ulysses Jones. Yeah.
All right. Trying to think if there's any other like preamble before we kind of dig in here.
I mean, I do have my thesis statement that I wrote the other sections, but
that was actually what just occurred to me, is that I didn't know if you wanted to lay out your thesis statement kind of at the beginning again, or if you'd prefer to save it for later in the ep.
I mean, I think the tradition holds. I can just do it in the beginning. So we've sort of already touched on this, but the part about fate, in which the African-American reporter Oscar Fate attempts to understand and report on the feminicidios despite an uninterested editor and an uncaring public, in order to process the death of his mother, and in doing so, he becomes embroiled in a conspiracy whose edges he is barely able to discern. Which, now that I say that, I feel like that leads out some of the important stuff. But this is sort of a tricky section in that, as we kind of been hinting at, it's hard to determine what is real and what is not real, as well as you were saying, John, the sort of droning like quality to some of this that captures some of the ambient unease that we might be more familiar with certain directors like David Lynch than writers. And I think that kind of quality of this section stands out to me as interesting and a bit different than the other two, although they did also get to that kind of droning unease. So
yeah, it's interesting, and I don't know if this is going to hold up as we continue through the rest of the book. But it feels like with each intervening chapter, we've kind of had more and more scenes of characters dissociating from reality in some way. So in the first section, I mean, we have the very violent scene with the taxi driver, which is its own kind of dissociation, but is very real as well. But we have scenes of dreams, of people waking up from dreams. In the part about Amalfitano, we have kind of his progression into, this fugue state where he meets the ghost of Boris Yeltsin and learns about the secrets of magic. And then in this part, we have a lot of scenes of Oscar waking up, and kind of a great deal of uncertainty about maybe how he is in the place he is currently, what he did before he fell asleep, what happened in the intervening time when he was asleep. There's a particular section where he gets drunk and he wakes up and throws up, and then he falls back asleep, wakes up. And when he wakes up, there's no vomit in the room, and he doesn't know where it went.
Yeah, what happened
is kind of funny, but also kind of if that happened to me, I'd be really unnerved.
Also, I think before that, there's that sequence where it's like he kept drinking and getting less drunk continuously, as if Mexican liquor was just merely water or something, because he would drink and then become sober and then get drunk again, and then suddenly it's 4 a.m. and he's just like, how did I get here? But
gringo problems.
Yeah, can't handle the Mexican liquor, but.
Yeah, I think that there is a quality here, and I don't know kind of where writing this falls into Bolaño's personal life history off the top of my head. But this section to me is very tangibly about grief and the experience of grief. We open with Oscar finding out that his mother has passed away. And like Ben said, he has to kind of organize her estate, tend her funeral. And that's, all happens before we have any inkling that of how we're going to end up in Santa Teresa.
Right.
I found myself, as I was reading this, I was like, how is he going to get to Santa Teresa? What is the inciting incident for that going to be?
Yeah.
And the kind of extra, slippery nature of the narrative here, the way that certain characters monologue and you kind of find yourself in Oscar's shoes, like watching these kind of strange people just kind of go on and on and on in these about things that really like don't make a lot of like surface level sense. There's a great passage we'll get to that is, kind of a eulogy offered for his mother at her funeral by someone who is a clear stand-in for Bobby Seale, the Black Panther Party member.
Yeah.
And, Bolaño does something kind of interesting where this character, you think it would be someone who's going to be like very erudite, very wise in a way. But he just kind of like rambles and bullshits like a weird old man.
Well, because like he alternates between saying things that are like important and true to the book as well as just in general. But yeah, then he'll say things that like how rap music is suicide and how poor people need to take care of their money more, which are just things that like an old man would say. Just like, like back in my day, we didn't listen to rap, like that kind of stuff. So, but
and I have not been through this particular experience myself, but it does feel of a piece with the experience of grief from the standpoint that you kind of exit reality in a way. Like the way other people act and treat you seems nonsensical. The attempts to comfort you or to provide some kind of context for what you're experiencing come across as meaningless or pointless or alien. I think that a lot of what Oscar is experiencing here is that kind of surreal quality that grief brings into life and loss brings into life. And, his actions, I think, can't be read outside of that context. And we'll get more into that as we get into what he does, but he makes some very strange and dangerous choices.
And like a cool hint as to his interiority, because we're not given it except in the beginning in a section that I feel like it's easy to forget about. It's like we're in his head and then it's just what he does. And he will often forget to eat. He will sleep a lot. And in that, as you were sort of expressing clearly, John, he's processing grief, but it's like you don't get his headspace being like, I like, why am I here? What's going on? I'm so confused. It's just his like actions. And in that, we can sort of guess that he's processing grief. And as you were saying, a lot of his decisions are related to that.
Yeah, I think there's also something very distinct about the fact that it's the death of his mother. This is another dead woman.
Yeah.
Obviously not a victim of the femicides or feminicidos in Santa Teresa. But I think like on a psychoanalytic level, like I think that when we kind of get him into Santa Teresa, I think that it becomes difficult for him to separate out dead women from dead mother.
Yeah. And at the same time, in the scenes where he goes to that movie and he sees that movie that's like a cop drama about how like all of these black policemen are corrupt in some way, there's like this sort of like feeling of guilt that he's experiencing. As to what, it's unclear, but that sort of guilt sort of bleeds through before he ends up in Santa Teresa for whatever reason. And I think like we could talk about that later, but I think there's like a sort of post-revolutionary like political valence to a lot of the characters where like the revolution has failed, what happens now, more or less. And whether or not that's connected or not, I think they're more like juxtaposed. But like he'll go to the movie theater and he was like sick because he ate some bad food and he sees the scene and the scene is about like complicity, and then he just goes and throws up immediately and leaves. So a lot going through this character's headspace I think was clearer in part 2, a part about Amalfitano, but then was less clear in part 1. So,
yeah. No, I mean, I think that, again, the fact that Bolaño approaches this from a different like genre valence, I guess we could say part about Amalfitano is kind of a psychological thriller, maybe, or like a narrative of just descent into madness.
Yeah.
This is like you said, this is, I think, telling a story that isn't completely, obviously they're of a piece, they're in the same book, but it's doing it through the lens of kind of, this postmodern noir, I guess we could say like detective story.
Yeah. So I guess we could start by saying, because we hinted he's processing his mother dying, but then he is meant to cover. He works for the magazine Black Dawn, and he's meant to cover a piece on Bobby Seaman, who I believe is actually, as you said, John, his real name is.
Well, he's a stand-in for Bobby Seale.
Bobby Seale. Yeah. He's a stand-in for Bobby Seale. Right. So Bobby Seale, or Bobby Seaman, excuse me, he gives speeches basically at churches. And so he's meant to go to Detroit to interview him and do a piece on the speech. But since he is still processing grief, he gets like really drunk. He almost gets into a fight at a bar. He then goes to find Seaman's house, and there's a scene that kind of made me chuckle where he knocks on the door and he's like about to throw up, and Seaman says, "Jesus Christ!" And so then he like throws up in the toilet. And he like passes out, and so then he wakes up with Seaman, and then they go to the church. At which point, as you were alluding to, John, Seaman delivers a rambling monologue about
rambling series of monologues.
Yeah, rambling series of monologues about several subjects. Yeah,
money, food, stars, and usefulness.
Now, there are a couple ways I think we could maybe interpret this section. There's a part where Oscar notes, as he's listening to this, that he starts talking about something, and then it's like the ghost of his former friend who he founded the Black Panthers with. It was as if the doors of the church had opened, wrote fate in his notebook, and the ghost of Newell walked in. Newell is a sort of pseudonym for Huey P. Newton, who founded the Black Panthers with Seal. And so then the monologue just kind of rambles over like food and metaphors in a section that I find particularly interesting that we could talk about. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about from this monologue? Because it takes up quite a big section of the book. And I think as you were describing, it sort of like takes over the reality of the book. Like we don't get Oscar Fate anymore, and it's just the monologue. Some people have compared it to the Father Maple monologue in Moby Dick, the one that's delivered before Ishmael gets on the boat, which I think is an interesting connection. But yeah, is there anything from this monologue that you wanted to talk about, or the series of monologues rather?
Yeah. Excuse me. So they're strange. I mean, they're one of the strangest parts of this section. I read through them once and then had to stop and read them again because I felt like I was missing something. And Correction Corner, I got mixed up. I thought these were like being given at his mother's funeral for some reason. I got a little lost in the sauce. But
well, John, he does mention mothers. He says a mother is a wonderful thing. So I think there is a connection there. But yeah, it's not explicitly for the eulogy. But
yeah. But I got a little lost in the sauce there. The thing that I guess I find a little troubling with them, and I'm wondering what you think here, Ben. Like we said, we have two stand-ins for two, incredibly important figures in like the history of like the Black revolutionary struggle in America, Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, two people who were persecuted mercilessly by the United States government, and who Bolaño, like his own politics, are theoretically at least somewhat in line with as a lefty, and I guess a third world lefty. I don't know if Bolaño ever like explicitly looked at the camera and said, "This is the exact type of communist I am," but we can make some assumptions,
right?
And like we said, when we originally referenced these monologues, there is almost something about the way that Bobby Seaman is portrayed that feels, I can't think of a better word right now than like sacrilegious.
Yeah.
Where it's, this is a person, a real person who presumably Bolaño like was respectful enough not to just call by his name.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know if I don't know off the top of my head if Bobby Seale was like alive at the time this book was written or anything like that. Forgive me. But clearly, like, Bolaño knows, like, I can't literally just have Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton like be referenced by name in this book. That's
right. Yeah.
Going like a step too far. So he has like, it's not like he's, again, like, I don't think he's being racist in like at least like not in like a conscious, like provocative sense, like where he wants to take like black people down a peg or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But there is something really uncomfortable about having a figure like Seal spouting complete horseshit at you for like 20 pages. And again, I don't know if, again, I don't know how much of this we're supposed to take as real. You know, are these literally what he's saying, or is this, again, Oscar's kind of weak grasp on like what's happening around him as he's grieving? Like, you know, the fifth monologue breaks off at a certain point so that Seaman can give a recipe for artichokes, like a full recipe. Yeah, in the middle of the monologue.
And also the way he gives it is quite funny. Just the intro. It says, then he began to talk about useful things the body needs. First, a balanced diet. I see a lot of fat people in this church, he said. I suspect few of you eat green vegetables. Maybe now is the time for a recipe. The name of the recipe is Brussels sprouts with lemon. Take note, please. And so, I don't know. I think, there's something about choosing to portray a political figure, like as you were saying, John, way past his prime in sort of the limbo of like post-revolutionary politics. And so it's like, what is like, this would be, 2004. So it's like almost quite a little bit after the end of history. And we get a group later that we're going to talk about like post 9/11, but not like fully into the tens. And he is giving it, he's basically saying, eat your vegetables, pull your damn pants up to some extent. He doesn't say that directly, but it's like sort of that kind of vibe.
It's the subtext.
Yeah, it's the subtext.
People were sagging then.
Yeah. And but then at the same time, he says things that are, I think, germane to the book's concerns in terms of like, if I'm going to talk about evil, how do I portray reality? So I have a section about that. But before I get into that, because I have a note about that, I want to say, I think he's taking a risk here, John. And I think in choosing to portray it this way, I think he's sort of interested in like maybe like life after the event, which like, Bolaño was a radical, like, political organizer in some extent. He was a lefty.
He was tortured by the Pinochet regime.
Right. So it's like, what do you do after that? And I think that's kind of like an attempt to portray that. Whether or not it's successful, who knows? But
no, I mean, I guess there is an element where we can almost read Seaman as a Bolaño stand, like basically he's being like, this is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Like I can't actually provide like a solution. I can't actually prescribe like what's next.
Right.
I have been at some level like spent as a political force by being tortured, and also I'm dying as I'm writing this.
Yeah.
So I can give you a bunch of words that can provide some kind of like emotional context or comfort, and maybe you can like take some of that into going to vote for John Kerry. John Kerry. Maybe John Kerry read this before he reported for duty in 2004.
He's gonna stand up to Bush. But the section that I do love from the speech, though, and I think this is it comes up later in this section. So he's talking about the stars, and then he says something, and I think this is like maybe like Bolaño intruding on this like character. Really, when you talk about stars, you're speaking figuratively. That's metaphor. Call someone a movie star, you've used a metaphor. Say the sky is full of stars, more metaphors. If somebody takes a hard right to the chin, boxing, and goes down, you say he's seeing stars. Another metaphor. Metaphors are our way of losing ourselves in semblances or treading water in a sea of seeming. In that sense, a metaphor is like a life jacket. And remember, there are life jackets that float and others that sink to the bottom like lead. Best not to forget it. But really, there's just one star, and that star isn't semblance. It isn't metaphor. It doesn't come from any dream or any nightmare. We have it right outside. It's the sun. The sun, I'm sorry to say, is our only star. So there's something about that bit where it says something that I think is important to the book, which is how do you talk about these things like violence, systematic killings, torture, but how do you render them in a way that makes them important but doesn't occlude what they are? And I think that's kind of like important to what the book's doing. I think it's a cool point about metaphors that it's a point about metaphors that's used with a metaphor. He's saying a metaphor is like a life jacket, which is a metaphor. And he's like, some of them are better than other ones, which I think is important. And Kessler in the Diner says something like that later. But then when it becomes the sun thing, it's sort of back into like, all right, this is an old man who's giving a speech and he's kind of just freewheeling. And then he's like, I'm trying to remember this movie and I don't remember the movie. And then it just kind of trails off. But I think that line, I think, is important to like what's going on. And like, you can see, again, Bolaño, the poet, kind of poking up to say like, metaphors are the way we make sense of stuff. How am I going to do this? Like, what's the point of talking about this? Like, how do I make it make sense, so to speak? So I like that section quite a bit. And then he also says reading is awesome. And he's like, reading is like, what does he say? I think this is designed to kind of give the reader a pat on the back. Reading is like thinking, like praying, like talking to a friend, like expressing your ideas, like listening to other people's ideas, like listening to music. Oh, yes. Like looking at the view, like taking a walk on the beach. And you who are so kind, now you must be asking, what did you read, Barry? I read everything. And then he says that he read the abridged digest of the complete works of Voltaire, which is a book that makes no sense. So it's fun. So
he got a lot out of it.
Yeah, he got a lot out of it. So yeah, a section that I think is a risk in what you've been saying, John, but that I think nonetheless has some things that are germane to what the book is doing, like kind of concealed in it. So.
Yeah, I mean, it feels very relevant when we kind of think about, I think, the timing of, like, not the writing of this book exactly, but I think the timing of, like, the collapse of the Panthers and the collapse of the Pinochet regime. I feel like if Bolaño is trying to make a point about, I don't want to say like trying to make a point about black people, because I almost feel like he's trying to make parallels between the situation of like the Chilean like left, maybe like the broader Latin American kind of left project and the black radical tradition in America, and sort of the ways in which they were crushed by similar forces and have now like fallen victim to sort of the same kind of decay in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's like, well, and not for nothing is this set in like Detroit, but in a Detroit that is not the Detroit that it used to be. So which there's some nods that are given to like post-industrial Detroit. So but.
And I think it's also important from the standpoint that Fate, like I said, he ends up getting assigned to go to Santa Teresa to cover a boxing match. He is not a sports reporter. He is basically like a politics, like a black politics reporter,
which is why he's covering Barry Seaman.
Seaman. It's also, we find out later that he like has written pieces about like basically like 5%er, like Brotherhood of Islam. Not Brotherhood of Islam. Wait.
It's called the Mohammedan Brotherhood, I believe.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of the real group. What's the real group called?
Not the Black Israelites.
That's like a spring off. What is the main group called? What was Malcolm X part of?
Oh,
Who's
man.
Farrakhan? What is that group called?
Nation of Islam.
Nation of Islam. Oh my gosh. Yeah. But yeah, he's written about groups like that. You get the impression that Fate is he likes writing and talking about politics, but he's not particularly political himself.
Right.
You know, he goes and like talks to these great, you know, figures from kind of a prior generation of Black political life, and looks at them as kind of like interesting characters to profile, but does not seem to be particularly like interested in like reviving or finding some kind of valence to carry forward in what they say.
Yeah.
You know, he seems like he is someone who kind of enjoys like flattering himself intellectually by getting to be a journalist.
Well, and interesting, he remembers that he actually wanted to write fiction, and his teacher said that he would be better being a journalist. So there's an interesting kind
What's the difference, Ben?
Well, what's the deal? Yeah. But I just thought that was an interesting bit that, like, yeah, it was sort of like he wanted to do this, and so he's ended up doing this, and like, yeah, he's covering these political groups, but yeah, he doesn't seem to be particularly invested in any of them, or
the magazine he writes for is called Black Dawn.
Yeah.
So, you know, from kind of the name, you get the impression like, oh, this was like a magazine that was probably started in like the 60s and, you know, has just kind of muddled through.
Right.
But like they are no longer probably as radical or as interested in like radicalism as they were. They're more interested in kind of observing the past, observing kind of these interesting characters from the past, but no one seems to like find anything particularly vital here. And the fact that Fate is able to be reassigned to go to Mexico to cover a boxing match rather than do his actual job, the fact that it is much more important they get someone down there to cover this boxing match than to cover something else probably says something about where journalism in 2004 was in America.
Yeah, and it should be noted that that Fate is sort of given this as almost like a quest. And when somebody asks him about it, he goes, "Did you hear Jimmy Lowell got whacked?" Which is like, to me, is sort of like ding 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 for like, okay, this is sort of like a hard boiled noir story, just saying like Jimmy Lowell got whacked. And Jimmy Lowell is the boxing correspondent who would have covered it in Santa Teresa, and then it becomes extremely vital that he gets sent down to do it. And as he's doing this, it sort of is like this call to adventure, so that when he's leaving, we're basically told that Fate starts smiling and laughing, which is something that he has not been doing since then. And as we're told as he gets up down the steps, see if I can find it. So as he's leaving, he goes back to say goodbye to Seaman, and he goes, they embraced, and Fate headed down the stairs, taking them in threes as if he was dashing for the street like a boy heading out for a free afternoon with his friends. As he drove toward the Detroit-Wayne County Airport, and remember, he's going to Santa Teresa, he thought about Seaman's strange books, the abridged French encyclopedia, and the one he hadn't seen but that Seaman had claimed to have read in person, the abridged digest of the complete works of Voltaire, which made him laugh out loud. So he's like, adventure, I'm going to Santa Teresa, maybe this will fix me, even though he doesn't say that immediately. That's clear, like it's like almost like a call to adventure, essentially. So
yeah. I mean, I think that if there is like a critique here of maybe Fate as a character, or maybe again something broader, there is kind of an element where there's definitely a critique here of kind of American like heroism.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe Bolaño thinks that you know, that's not like an exclusively white thing, because he kind of goes into Santa Teresa looking at it as kind of like, it's fate. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what's gonna like get me back on track.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he hears about the feminicidos, he like is like, oh, this is what I have to dedicate myself to.
Right.
I'm gonna crack this. I'm gonna write a huge expose on this. I don't care about the boxing match anymore. I want to cover this, and then, you know, it spirals from there in ways we'll get into.
And interestingly, his editor is not interested. His editor says, like, nobody really cares. You're supposed to cover the boxing match. And Fate is like, I'm going to do a report about conditions in the third world. And he's like, I don't care. You're supposed to cover the boxing match. Like, and this is meant to be kind of a parallel where as he's going to Santa Teresa, he overhears an expert, Dr. Kessler, who will show up in part 4, discoursing about these feminicidios. And he says essentially that the people that are killed are outside society. Society does not care for them, and nobody cares. And so the significance of this is that people can't be told to care about this. And that conversation, as Kessler is telling somebody at the diner, like, Fate's eavesdropping, that conversation is basically mirrored once Fate finds out about the feminicidios and is calling his editor, and his editor is like, just cover the damn boxing match, basically. like, you know, that's what you're there to do. So
it's a very funny scene because it to me it felt very real, where I feel like, Ben, have you ever found yourself in the situation where it's like you've been given a very easy assignment? Like the coverage of this boxing match, he is not being asked to write a front page story. He's being asked to write a 5-paragraph column to go in the sports section of this magazine. It should take an evening of work tops.
Right. Yeah.
She'd be able to go to this boxing match,
take a few notes,
take a few notes, go back to the hotel, pump out 5 paragraphs just describing what happened and be done. And instead he's like, well, I know that you gave me this really easy job to do, and you paid for me to fly to Mexico and kind of have a vacation at the same time. I don't want to do that. I want to do this huge, sprawling, expensive, time-consuming thing that there's no reason for our magazine to cover. I don't know. I've never written for a magazine, but I've definitely had situations where my eyes got a little too big for my stomach, so to speak, and it caused me to not do what could have just been a very easy, simple job. So that feels very real to me.
And then they have an argument in French. At one point he's like, I'm going to do the mise-en scene, and the editor's like, the mise-en what? And he's like, the atmosphere, I think Fate sees this as an opportunity to to get back on track, so to speak. The complicity that he was feeling, the guilt, this could all be, expunged through doing this. And I think it's interesting that Bolaño presents it as kind of nobody cares because of this broader point, but also because, he's just supposed to do this for a plot point. And so there's an interesting friction there. And I think the first time I read this, I was like, well, these other two people couldn't handle it. Fate's going to be the one to do it. He's going to crack the case, so to speak. And I think we're shown in this section that things are a lot more complicated and confusing than that. And also to present it as if you could just ride into town and solve everything is to miss the point, more or less. It's not going to be that easy. So
doesn't either Kessler or his student make the case that the murders might have multiple culprits?
Yeah, Kessler says that in the summary, which is worth mentioning just briefly because it's germane to the plot. All right, then, said the white-haired man. This is Kessler. I'll tell you 3 things I'm sure of. A, everyone living in that city is outside of society, and everyone, I mean everyone, is like the ancient Christians and the Roman circus. B, the crimes have different signatures. C, the city seems to be booming. It seems to be moving ahead in some ineffable way, but the best thing would be for every last one of the people there to head out into the desert some night and cross the border.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I don't know if it's really been, the case has been made at any point earlier in the book that all these murders are one person.
Yeah.
But I think that as readers, we kind of presume that because it's we're reading a story. There has to be a villain. We have to, at some point, pull the mask off of the murderer and it was Old Man Jenkins.
Right.
I think Bolaño here is, kind of having some fun with the reader, because I think that the reader is in Fate's shoes. We think still that there might be a payoff here. There might be like you said, Ben, like you read this section kind of with the thought process, like, oh, there's a plot here I'm following,
right?
That's going to have like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and like everything's gonna like tie up in a neat bow at the end of the book, and we're gonna figure out like what's going on, and,
right.
and Oscar's gonna crack the case. And Bolaño, I think, he's asking like, the narratives we use to make sense of the world are life jackets, to refer back to the speech. They maybe aren't fit to task. The detective novel may not be a way that we can understand like neo-colonial violence in Latin America in the 90s and 2000s.
Well, and Kessler even says something similar where he says, in the 19th century, toward the middle or end of the 19th century, said the white-haired man, society tended to filter death through the fabric of words. Reading news stories from back then, you might get the idea there was hardly any crime or that a single murder could throw a whole country into tumult. We didn't want death in the home or in our dreams and fantasies, and yet it was a fact that terrible crimes were committed, mutilations, all kinds of rape, even serial killings. And then he goes, what does a child do when he's afraid? He closes his eyes. What does a child do when he's about to be raped and murdered? He closes his eyes and he screams too. But first he closes his eyes. Words served that purpose. And so as if Kessler is saying, like, you can explain these things by like telling them in a story, by reporting on only the sensational aspects of them and not the mundane industrial side, which is clearly the one that we're, like trying to get to the bottom of in this book. So.
Yeah. Just a little background, like for readers who maybe are younger, didn't live through these times. I mean, Ben and I were alive, but we were pretty a little too young to be following like what was actually going on here. There were the real femicides in particularly Juarez were motivated by the building of these factories called maquiladoras on the northern border of Mexico, basically to take advantage of NAFTA trade policy. Basically, all these factories sprung up overnight, more or less, because it became so much cheaper to manufacture goods over the border of Mexico and then ship them back into the United States. This led to like a huge influx of unattached people coming to work in these factories. And as tends to happen, a lot of people ended up in really bad circumstances because they showed up to work these terrible jobs at these horrible places with no friends or family looking out for them, and no real way for people like back home to know where they were if they were safe.
And they had to like live there as well, like next to the factory. So yeah,
people were traveling like long distances to get to these places. This was not like, oh, they were commuting. They were basically living in like tent cities, from what I understand. So Santa Teresa, that is kind of the vibe. And that is why Kessler says like they should just go into the desert and try to cross the border. Like,
yeah, because it would be better in America than to stay there. Yeah. So
yes. So I guess we should probably get a little more into the plot because we are still probably like less than half of the way through what happens in this section.
Yes, I agree. I just thought it'd be useful to point out those parallels because as John was saying, a lot of characters just monologue in this section and it can be sort of like, why is this going on? And I think there are some parallels there, but yeah, we should get into the plot. So
yeah. So after he arrives in Mexico, after he has lunch somewhere and hears this conversation between this like criminologist and his students. He arrives and he kind of ends up connecting with sort of the Santa Teresan underworld through this boxing match. He, is kind of tries to do like some initial research and interviews. The reason this boxing match is such a big deal is because like the Mexican heavyweight like champ is going to be fighting an American, and Mexico apparently like per the book, never produces heavyweight boxers. So the fact that they have one and he's supposedly very good is like a huge mark of like American or of Mexican pride.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of like hope that he is going to be able to, Rocky style, take down this American that he's going to be fighting and kind of, bring one home for the Big M, Mexico. But in doing that, yes, Oscar ends up meeting a character named Chucho Flores, who is another reporter for like the local Mexican newspaper, who we also find out is the kind of on again, off again boyfriend of Rosa Malfitano,
who Fate is immediately smitten with.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And then, some other folks, he meets these two like American boxers or ex-boxers who are like training there.
Yeah, the sparring partners. Yeah.
Yeah, the sparring partners. That was kind of a weird section to me. I couldn't quite figure out what to make of those guys. I almost felt like they were maybe supposed to be like intelligence assets or something. There's something very sinister about them.
Well, it's Omar Abdul, and then there's another guy who has like a lot of scary tattoos, and it's implied that guy just was a former boxer himself and snapped and killed his sister. And all Fate says when he hears about this is so a couple of fuck ups is basically how he describes them. So yeah, these sort of like down on their luck people who are sort of being sparring partners for the Mexican heavyweight who's going to fight the American heavyweight at this upcoming match.
Yeah. So before we kind of get into the kind of the real action of this chapter. Is there anything you kind of talk about from kind of this like queasy middle section, Ben?
Let me see if I marked anything real quick, because this is where I think the droning vibe starts to really kind of take hold. When they're waiting around, one of the journalists covering the boxing match delivers this like really weird racist rant about various cultures mixing in Mexico that culminates with Fate kind of freaking out at him and basically asking if he's flacking for the Klan in a way that's supposed to sort of set, I think, the unease as well as the sort of weird masculine racist logic that is behind whoever's giving the speech. It's explained away as just being the result of boredom, which I think is supposed to be kind of a nod to the epigraph, an oasis of horror in a desert of boredom. But Fate kind of snaps, and I think we're meant to see this as a bit of a important moment before we get further into the underworld. Basically, I'm not going to get into the rant because it's kind of weird and it doesn't really bear repeating with on the podcast, but it's about cultures mixing over time in Mexico. And so basically the others laughed and then they all assumed expressions of penitence. We probably shouldn't have been laughing at that. 20 seconds of silence to remember the unfortunate Carreno. The faces suddenly solemn made Fate think of a masked ball. For a brief instant, he couldn't breathe. He saw his mother's empty apartment. He had a premonition of two people making love in a miserable room, all at the same time, a moment defined by the word climacteric. What are you flacking for, the Klan? And then he tries to beat one of them and they shrug it off. They're like, get this guy out of here. And then they're like, oh, he didn't mean it. He was just bored. But I think having somebody say climacteric, which means a turning point, I think that's almost as if Fate is determined to figure out what's going on. Even though this weird racist rant is not exactly about the feminicidios. It has to do with just culture mixing.
Certain, dysgenic quality that race mixing has given the Mexican people.
But Fate's that's it, fuck this. And so then I think that is again that weird scene of just a masked ball and he sees all of these horrifying images. That's the kind of weird tension imagery that Bolaño is very good at. And I think that kind of gives him to go into the all right, what's going on here? And so then the kind of descent happens. So he meets a local reporter, Ronsal Guadalupe, is that her name? Yes. Yeah.
And and who is also covering the feminicidos. You get the impression like at substantial risk to her own life.
Yes. Yeah.
And Fate kind of tries to connect with her to try to see if he can find an angle that he can work here. I just something just occurred to me, Ben, when you were talking about kind of that moment where he snaps. I think that another thing that's interesting here is that I think I'm starting to see like why Bolaño chooses to have a black character in this section. When we first started, I didn't say this, but I thought past my mind. It was like, could you do the same section, but Oscar is white? Obviously, you'd have to change some stuff.
Yeah.
But like in terms of kind of the Santa Teresa plot, could you have a story about like a white reporter going to Santa Teresa to cover a boxing match and then deciding, oh, I want to cover the feminicidos, and then getting like embroiled in this underworld plot? And at first I was like, you probably could, like, and then I was just thinking as you brought up the thing about like him talking about like the Klan, I think that there's kind of this thing where it's this way of making him more of an outsider.
Yeah.
And crucially, like making it so that he is an outsider who, despite coming from America, he is not safe.
Yeah.
A white character, I mean, obviously bad things can happen to white people in Mexico, but like a white character, there would be this like extra weight of like, oh, what if someone finds out that like, a white guy got killed by like these criminals.
That's exactly what Kessler was talking about. It's like the sensational stories that detract from what's going on. So yeah.
Whereas like Oscar, like even though he's an American, even though he does like have a fair amount of like socioeconomic privilege, like going into Mexico, like he's wanting for nothing at this point. Like he's staying in a hotel, he's drinking as much as he wants.
Right.
He seems pretty cushy in that regard. But there is kind of an element where it's like, oh, if he pisses off the wrong person, like he's just going to end up buried in the desert and no one is going to care.
Yeah, and he even sort of realizes the privilege a bit where he's like drunk ordering hot dogs and he's trying to talk to the woman who's working at the gas station or the store, I think. And he goes, I don't understand. I'm an American. And so then he figures it out. And then he's like, why did I say that? like he's like, am I different now that I'm here? Like, and there's this sort of like, he has like a moment of like awareness that he has some privilege, but also, again, it's like not quite as if he were white or, like up on the pole.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it seems like even at some level, like his editor would be like, oh, he did something stupid and he paid for it if he were to just like up and vanish.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. The stuff Bolaño's doing with race here is complicated, and I'm still not sure exactly what I think he's trying to do, but that seems important. Sorry, that was a tangent.
No, I think that was worth it to point out, because I think, again, these sort of moments of like him having more gumption than the critics, and in some ways Amalfitano, even though Amalfitano kind of gets a pass because he might be, having mental problems, they're usually kind of like race related when he decides to do something about it. They're race related, and also, he as we've been saying, from a character standpoint, he does want to do something. So.
Well, I almost feel like there's almost an element, and I don't mean this to be critical of his actions exactly on like a moral level, but it almost feels like there's kind of an element like when he lashes out at that guy, he's like, that guy's being racist. I'm in a country where I can hit him. Yeah. Like I can try to put my like Americanness like on like to my advantage here. Maybe it's still a stupid thing to do. Well, for your own safety. Yeah. But there is kind of this attempt to like flex what privilege he now has relationally.
Well, and that is even more explicitly understated when they go to Charlie Cruz's house. And he says, and this is jumping ahead just a little bit, but without getting too much into it, he says, one sec. Now I have to try to be what I am, thought Fate, a black guy from Harlem, a terrifying Harlem motherfucker. Almost immediately, he realized that neither of the Mexicans was impressed. So I think that's definitely a part of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so in kind of a parallel to Amalfitano making friends with the one guy's son, the dean's son in the previous section, Fate ends up falling in with Chucho, who kind of serves as kind of his Virgil, I guess you would say, to Fate's Dante, as he kind of makes this wary descent into the underworld. Chucho is an interesting character. He feels kind of a type that Bolaño writes fairly often, which is kind of this shady guy who is kind of outwardly respectable, but again, you just scratch the surface and there is kind of he has like a bunch of sketchy connections,
right,
and like sketchy interests, and he's also like a roiling cauldron of like personal and sexual violence that is just like barely holding it together.
Yeah, barely contained. Yeah.
But somehow still manages to be like charming at the same time.
Yeah, and you get a sense, like, they don't talk about how he's dressed, but I was imagining he's probably like a flashy dresser, and he's like this,
like a white suit.
Yeah, like the center of attention. Yeah, so
he's very flashy. As we find out when Rosa kind of explains her relationship with him and how they got together, you get the impression. Again, in kind of this way Bolaño is very good at, where he hints without saying he knows something about like what's going on in Santa Teresa.
Yeah.
If not, is actively involved in it.
Or facilitating it in some way. Yeah.
Facilitating in some way, benefiting from it in some way.
Yeah.
And his role as a journalist like is helpful in some way to that, or has given him connections. He reminds me a little bit like he's like a non-chill version of the pig from the first section.
Yeah, that's a good call. He's like the dark version of the pig, but like
he's a writer. You get the impression like he's not stupid, like he's fairly intellectual for like the milieu he's in. But he has like that has given him a lot of like dangerous, weird, and scary connections.
Yeah.
And him and Fate kind of get together because they're basically working the same beat here. But you get the impression Fate is a little charmed by him the same way a lot of other people seem to be.
And it's also worth noting in this character that this section is without getting to spoilers what happened later, this section is where references to vampires start popping up.
Creeping in.
And I think it's not difficult to point out that Chucho might be kind of vampiric in that way, where he's clearly benefiting on this in something. And again, we're not really, Chucho isn't explained in vampire terms. It doesn't say Chucho is a vampire. But there are asides to vampires. There's a woman with a mark on her neck on the airplane. It's sort of like kind of sneaking its way in. So, yeah
absolutely. And he definitely serves as, like a gothic character from the standpoint. Like he is the one who, brings Fate into this world kind of almost without him realizing how like deep he's gotten. Because there's in kind of his interactions with Chucho, Fate isn't necessarily actively pursuing the Feminicido story. They're talking about this boxing match. They're dealing with kind of the practicalities of both of them writing their respective pieces on this thing, and they're meeting people related to the boxing industry, which, surprise, surprise, a lot of criminals there. But kind of without realizing it, like Fate ends up tied up in what is almost certainly like at least part of this murder like ring.
Yeah.
And Chucho is there the whole way.
Right. Yeah. And like, so they go to the boxing match. The boxing match.
I really like the way the boxing match happens.
Yeah. It's like they're singing the Mexican national anthem. The mood is jubilant. Oscar is like, man, Rosa Amalfitano's hot. and he's like, I'm really happy to be here at this boxing match, doing this gig with Chucho and this hot lady and other people there that we meet as well. And then he kind
of gets brought into like this friend group almost.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And then the boxing match is incredibly anticlimactic and the American wins easily.
Yeah, in like a round or something. Yeah, it's just like it's extremely short.
There's like one round where it looks like the Mexican guy might like actually get some kind of score, and then he's just like boom.
Yeah, just KO'd immediately. It's anticlimactic. And then they go to a restaurant called the Taco King,
yes.
which honestly, this scene for some reason I don't know why it's so unsettling, but there's a part where they're like
incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, they go to this restaurant called Taco King, and they're like he's like looking at the wall, and there's these like comic illustrations of like the little Taco King and his burro, but then they get increasingly more fucked up, where like the Taco King child is like pointing a gun at the burrow, and there's like this like really like dark stuff, and then like they're in the restaurant and they're just like, this is hell. like we're in hell basically, which like I don't know why this scene is in here, but I still think it's like incredibly unsettling. So they're like, we're in hell in this restaurant. But
I have a read on that.
Okay.
Where I think that it is there because again I think that it is the point where I think Oscar starts understanding the fact that, Mexico for me, like, because again, when even though he knows about the feminicidas, he knows there are bad things happening to women here, but he is not thinking about it as bad stuff is happening to women, like on a structural, like economic level. He is not fully confronting the violence. What he is thinking about is, oh man, I could write a great story about this. I could crack this case. I could be a hero.
Yeah.
I could bring all this attention to this problem. And, he really, at some level, like he treats Mexico through this section as kind of like Santa Teresa for being kind of a shit place. Like he treats like it's an all-inclusive resort.
Yeah.
Kind of similarly to the way the critics kind of do in the first part.
Right. Yeah.
And this is the point where I think because he realizes like, oh, I'm descending now. Like I am in this to some degree. Like it feels like the first scene where he becomes aware of like, oh, there's like a real darkness here that I've been ignoring.
Yeah.
Or that like I have been treating like a cartoon more or less.
So as he says at the restaurant, the young waiters radiated exhaustion, although they smiled at the customers. Some of them seemed lost in the desert that was El Rey de Taco. Others, 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds, tried in vain to joke with some of the diners, men on their own or in pairs who looked like government workers or cops, men who eyed them grimly in no mood for jokes. Some of the girls had tears in their eyes and they seemed unreal, faces glimpsed in a dream. This place is like hell, he said to Rosa Amalfitano. So,
which, man, if you ever worked in food service, that's how it feels.
But yeah, I was like, just imagine again, you just like look at the wall and you see the cartoon illustration, and it's like some of the scenes depicted were charmingly ordinary. The boy, the burro, and a one-eyed old woman, or the boy, the burro, and a well, or the boy, the burro, and a pot of beans. Other scenes were set firmly in the realm of the fantastic. In some, the boy and the burro fell down a ravine. In others, the boy and the burro were tied to a funeral pyre, and there was even one in which the boy threatened to shoot his burro, holding a gun to its head. like you just, yeah. But.
Well, and it's great because like you read those, and because I'm in like the Bolaño headspace, like I'm imagining something that like is fucked.
Yeah.
But then like I think about it, and it's like, oh, like this is like still like just Looney Tunes shit. Like I'm sure I can find like pictures of Bugs Bunny in those exact three same situations. And so it's kind of this thing where it's like, oh, this probably isn't actually like that scary or weird. It's just like because of the headspace everyone is in.
Right.
Like they're reading what is in fact innocent is horrifying.
Yeah, and as you were saying, John, yeah, working in food service, it does get this weird, but it's also just customer service. Like, yeah. So,
well, like kind of the weird way like childish things can become sinister when like you don't understand what they're referencing. Because like this is like a well-known cartoon. Like if it was Bugs Bunny, it wouldn't be scary. It's the fact that this is like a foreign thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. it's a really interesting scene, and I liked it a lot. It's really like one of the scenes where I found myself like kind of feeling a little bit of a chill as I was reading it. So kind of just to lay out the rest of what is going to happen. Like we said, he's been brought into kind of this friend group consisting of Chucho Flores, Rosa Amalfitano, and then they have like two friends, Rosa Mendez or Rosalita Mendez, who is a friend of Rosa Amalfitano's, and then her boyfriend, what's his name? Is that sorry. Is that Juan Corona?
I think so, because then another nameless guy shows up at Charlie Cruz's house. I don't know if you mentioned Charlie Cruz. He's also there too.
We have not mentioned Charlie Cruz yet, but he's important because basically they end up going to like an after party.
Yeah. And then, well, they go to an after party, at which point Oscar sees some fucked up stuff, and then they go to Charlie Cruz's house, which is like the after party after the party. Yeah. So, yeah.
After the party, it's the after party. And after the party, it's the hotel lobby.
That's pretty much what happens. So, okay. So, do we want to talk about the fucked up stuff he suffered? Just want to jump to Charlie Cruz's house.
Let's talk about the fucked up stuff.
I like how after the El Rey del Taco, they say later he remembered vaguely they were at a few clubs, maybe 3. Actually, it might have been 4. No, 3. But there they were, also at a 4th place, which wasn't exactly a club or a private house either. The music was loud. One of the clubs, not the first one, had a patio. From the patio where they stacked boxes of soft drinks and beer, you could see the sky, a black sky like the bottom of the sea. At some point, Fate threw up. Then he laughed because something on the patio struck him as funny. What? He didn't know. Something that was moving or crawling along the chain link fence. Maybe a sheet of newspaper. And so there's like this, again, weird sort of haze of alcohol. And then later, they at a different party, or at the same party, so they said it's somebody's birthday. Announced it was someone's birthday that night, the birthday of a person who wasn't with them, but whom Chucho Flores and Charlie Cruz apparently knew. So then as they're singing happy birthday, Rosa says, I'm not Mexican, I'm Spanish. Fate thought about Spain. He was going to ask her what part of Spain she was from when he saw a man hit a woman in a corner of the room. The first blow made the woman's head snap violently, and the second blow knocked her down. Without thinking, Fate tried to move toward them, but someone grabbed his arm. When he turned to see who it was, no one was there. In the opposite corner of the club, the man who had hit the woman stepped next to where she was huddled on the ground and kicked her in the stomach. A few feet away from him, he saw Rosa Mendez smiling happily. Next to her was Corona, who was looking in a different direction with the usual serious expression on his face. Corona's arm was around Rosa Mendez's shoulders. Every so often, she would lift Corona's hand to her mouth and bite his finger. Sometimes Rosa Mendez's teeth bit too hard, and then Corona's brow furrowed slightly.
I will say this part, I really like this leg of the book because it really captures the feeling of having a terrible night out with people like you really like barely know. Yeah. You just kind of like ended up swept along with, and you really just kind of don't know what's going on.
Yeah, because he's like, I don't know. It's like, where am I? Did I throw up? And then he's like trying to talk to Rosa, and then he sees like a woman get beat up in the corner, and he can't help her. And then like he looks at Rosa, and Rosa's just like vampirically gnawing on Corona's finger, like
it feels very real.
yeah. And he's like,
I've had nights like this to some degree.
And like you can imagine that like I always imagine this scene shot as if there's like strobing lights, and so like Fate like thinks he sees something, but it's like unclear. And
then like there's a strobe, and then like it's gone. And especially like the thing crawling along the chain link fence. I'm like, oh man, that could.
Well, and then he's like, maybe a newspaper, and then it's like that's no, that's it. Yeah, like it could be somebody.
Not gonna think about that.
But yeah, also just so that's like, again, it's the alcohol is in high effect. Things are hazy, but there's this sort of like atmosphere of like seething violence that's just kind of like percolating underneath everything. So
And then we go to Charlie Cruz's house.
Yes.
Charlie Cruz, the video kingpin of Santa Teresa.
He owns 3 stores. Yeah. I don't know. Okay, so Charlie Cruz's house is, like, again, extremely ominous and unsettling. I still don't know what I think about.
It is a haunted house.
Yeah.
Like, this is the, truly, like, gothic part of this section.
Yeah, they're like, there's like no windows in the living room, and they're just like, why are there no windows in the living room? Yeah, like I don't know what I think about Charlie Cruz either, because he's the video king. He owns 3 stores. He delivers this like interesting monologue about how watching a movie in your house is sacred to him and can be sacred to you as well. But then he also keeps talking about this hidden Roberto Rodriguez movie that nobody knows except him. There's one that Roberto Rodriguez did. And he's like, you guys want to watch it? Basically, like, and so I don't know what's going on with Charlie Cruz, to be honest, other than like some sinister stuff. So like,
so I mean, obviously there's kind of the base, like, sinister, like, oh, this guy's probably like records snuff films here. But I think that, like, so something that is happening a lot in this section, and I kind of want, I don't recall if there's a lot of references to this in the parts before. And maybe this is, again, kind of another part of kind of the transition between different characters and different, like, styles of storytelling that Bolaño is moving in and out of. There are a lot of references to film in the part about fate. Ben, you reference like Oscar remembering like a movie he sees about like black cops. There's this bit. There's the secret Robert Rodriguez movie. There's a part where they go see a movie. Bolaño is making a lot of references to film throughout this. I mean, I think
David Lynch gets dropped too, name dropped. Yes.
So I think that part of it is I think there's kind of an element here where I think it's highlighting the fact that we're dealing with like a different type of person in this section. Because in the previous 2 sections we've been dealing with literati, more or less. Like, the critics don't watch movies. Like, they don't own TVs.
Yeah, they
need to movies at home in particular.
They need to reread Archambaldi another 100 times. They don't have time. So
Amalfitano also probably does not own a TV.
And he's got other things to worry about.
He's got other. He's learning magic from Boris Yeltsin's Ghost, which is better than TV if you think about it.
Yeah, very much so.
But I mean, I think that there is an element here where film, this is a theme in the work of David Lynch. Like, there is a way that film is kind of the most surreal form of art, like, because it feels like it should be real. We're seeing a real thing, quote unquote, happen. And then we like have to process it regardless of whether or not it happened, in a way that, like, books, there is always kind of a remove, because your imagination is the thing doing the work. So I think there's something there. The like secret Robert Rodriguez movie is really interesting to me. I love like the like lost media trope. It's definitely like one of the like pulpy tropes that I'm just absolutely am always on board for. I like to think that every artist or director or author has like secret manuscripts or like secret works that no one knows about, where they like killed a guy or something.
Something incredible or fucked up happens.
I think there's something there about, I always have said that the lost media, and particularly like kind of the haunted lost media trope, is kind of this desire for like art to be more than it is. Like the idea that there's a secret Robert Rodriguez movie, and if you see it, like it'll drive you crazy. Like, it's kind of this way of being like, I want a movie that can drive me crazy to exist. Like, I want art to have that kind of effect on my mind and on the world. I don't know if that's exactly what Bolaño is doing here, but I'm thinking kind of back to the monologues of Seal. There's again this question about like, what is art good for? What's real? What's fake? Where do we draw these boundaries? Like, is there a use for the fake? Is there a use for art? yeah.
Or like, what can it tell us about real things as well? Yeah. So
yeah, because there's an element where, again, like the implication I was picking up was, again, that Charlie Cruz is probably recording, like, if not snuff films, like rape pornography or something like that in this house. Like, that is why there are no windows in the living room.
Right. And also, like, the Robert Rodriguez film, I think, to your point about it having an effect on Oscar, I mean, it causes him to do something, which we can talk about. Like, it causes him to act in a way that he's kind of been doing as a result. And it is, as you were saying, like, there are scenes of rape pornography in the description given. There's hallucinatory imagery. There's the death's head. There's like, it's kind of a frightening film. I see that I wrote in no
from
other.
The maker of Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
well,
and Spy Kids.
Worth noting, in Natasha Wimmer's annotations, she says no such film by Roberto Rodriguez exists. Like so that it's clear that the maker of Shark Boy and Lava Girl did not make this. But
I really funny if Bolaño just thrown in, and Danny Trejo was there. just being there.
There's just a shot of Danny Trejo.
Just chilling.
Well, but I wrote, like, in a pen that I hadn't used in any other part of the book, shit, after the end of the description of the tape, because it's like it's also like I think sort of full on horror, or at least presented that way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's the closest we've gotten to actually seeing violence happen.
Which, to your point, it's a movie, so who knows?
It could be totally fake.
Yeah, it could be totally fake, but it's like it is the closest we get to actual violence shown, and then it causes Oscar fate to act as well. Like, it has the desired effect. Yeah, or I mean, I don't know if it's a desired effect. It has an effect on him. So
it has an effect, exactly, because basically he starts having, like, paranoid fantasies about, like, oh, they're going to do this to Rosa. I have to get Rosa out of here.
Right. And Rosa is meanwhile, like, doing drugs, basically, because Charlie Cruz is meeting with somebody, maybe about a drug deal, maybe not, but she's getting high in the corner. And so Oscar goes, "Where's Rosa?" She's upstairs. He goes upstairs. This is where that scene happens where he tries to basically become intimidating in order to get Rosa out. And as we're told, almost immediately he realized that neither of the Mexicans was impressed. And then he goes, "Charlie, where's Rosa?" he asked. Chucho Flores managed to point out to a corner of the room that Fate hadn't seen. "I've lived this scene before," thought Fate. Rosa was sitting in an armchair with her legs crossed, snorting cocaine. "Let's go," he said. He didn't order her or plead with her. He just asked her to come with him, but he put all his soul into the words. Rosa smiled at him sympathetically, but she didn't seem to understand. So then he takes Rosa, and then at which point, Corona tries to prevent him. So hold on. As they left the room, he felt Corona grab his arm and saw him lift his free hand, which seemed to be holding a blunt instrument. He turned around and dealt Corona an uppercut to the chin in the style of Count Pickett. Like Marilino Fernandez earlier, Corona dropped to the floor without a sound. Only then did Fate realize Corona was holding a gun. He took it away from him and asked Chucho Flores what he planned to do. "I'm not jealous, amigo," said Chucho Flores with his hands raised to chest height so that Fate could see he wasn't carrying a weapon. Rosa Almafatano looked at Corona's gun as if it were a sex shop contraption. "Let's go," he heard her saying. I love that. Again, they're not impressed. He's like, "Let's get out of here." Oscar kind of, like, unconsciously just knocks out Corona. Only later it's realized that he has a gun. And then Chucho's like, "You're clearly overreacting." like I'm not jealous. And then they just leave. So yeah.
See, I read that scene just a tiny bit differently, because we find out later from Rosa that Chucho Flores is an insanely jealous man.
He's clearly extremely jealous of what's going on, but, like, there's the kind of feeling that, like, even though he had a gun, it's like, what's going on here? Like, it's unclear, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those things where there's almost kind of an element where, like you said, they're not impressed. Then he lays this guy out with one punch. Yeah. And, like, immediately, like, goes for his gun. And it's like, oh, I think Chucho's kind of like, oh, am I in over my head? Yeah. Has this kind of, like, dopey, like, American that I have been kind of pityingly like taking under my wing, mostly kind of like watch him freak out and like be weird. Like, is he actually like, yeah, like an intelligence asset or something? Like, am I in danger now?
Yeah. But yeah, as you're saying, John, when Rosa eventually tells Oscar about Chucho and their relationship, you find out that he is, an insanely jealous, insane man. So yeah.
So yeah, it's a great scene just from the standpoint. It's hilarious. Because again, it's sort of this moment of anticlimax. You think we are about to see like behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Like we see the fucked up stuff with, like when he's at the parties, we see the fucked up movie. There was part of me that was like, are we going to walk in and like Rose is going to be dead? Or
well, so you say that because before he goes to find Amalfitano, he opens the door. Rosa Mendez was lying face down on a military-looking bed. She was dressed and had high heels on, but she seemed to be asleep or to have passed out. The room was furnished with only a bed and a chair. He went over to the girl and turned her head. Rosa Mendez smiled without opening her eyes. This hallway led to another, and then he's just out of the room. So Rosa Mendez is like lying on a bed, apparently still conscious, but anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, we're gonna see,
absolutely. Yeah. No, that's definitely like, again, you think he's gonna like turn her head and it's gonna be like a jump scare. It's like, oh, she's fucking dead. You know, and the fact that like Bolaño is like, no, I'm not going to show you that. And then he shows you something actually incredibly funny.
Well, and like you were saying with the movie, it's like, oh, this is like a heroic moment. Like, but he's like punching a random guy. Like, it's a catharsis that the book has been like, not like sort of resisting and then builds toward, but in like a kind of ironic way. So
yeah. And even like what's going on, there's still like an ironic element here, where like he gets Rosa to go with him, but it's not because she's in love with him or, you know, that she like it almost read to me as kind of like, I'm trying to think of like an example, but like it made me think of like a bit in a movie where it's like there's like the romantic lead is like trying to get the woman to like go with him. She's like, I love you. And she's like, fine, I'll go with you.
Yeah. Like just, all right.
Just shut up, Jesus. Like, you don't get the impression like Rose is going with him to like de-escalate, but she's going with him because she's high on drugs and this seems like an appealing thing to do with her time.
Yeah, and as we're told later, Chucho's kind of a weirdo, and then when they go back to Oscar's hotel, it's like the adrenaline wears off, and then he realizes that he'd been like kind of an idiot. Like he's like, I think I've maybe been an idiot.
He's probably in danger now.
Yeah.
Because he is presumably like laid hands on someone who is at the very least like a petty criminal with a gun.
Right.
And then we learn from Rosa like, oh, Chucho, he seemed nice when I first met him. Then I found out that he is insane, abusive, basically stalks me to make sure that I'm not cheating on him.
And that scene itself, there's a great image where he shows up and screams at her, and like Rosa looks at the table and sees like crawling termites as this is happening, which is a nice like horror inset image, we might say. So yeah.
And so again, things take like a weird turn here.
Yeah.
Because at this point, like, they decide they're going to cross the border together.
Well, first they go to Oscar Amalfitano, her dad's house. Yeah.
Yes.
And
in better shape than I would have expected.
Yeah.
Like he's still alive. And he still seems like he can hold a conversation.
Well, yeah, and then he's just like, you should put it on a plane to Barcelona. Like it's basically what he tells Oscar Fade.
Yes. So basically, like crucially, like a police car shows up at the Amalfitano house.
Yeah.
And that's kind of when they realize like, oh, we are being pursued. And it's actually kind of a funny scene because again, Amalfitano goes out and talks to the police officer, and it almost feels like he kind of like Jedi mind tricks him.
Yeah,
like maybe he has learned some magic. He kind of ensorcels this police officer and gets him to leave.
Yeah, this isn't the house you're looking for. Yeah.
And then he comes back and he tells Oscar, like, get over the border, get her on a plane back to Barcelona, because crucially, not Teresa, Rosa is a Spanish citizen. She is not stuck here. And you get the impression like Amalfitano has accepted his fate. He is now like one of the dead, like he is trapped here.
Yeah.
But there is still hope for Rosa, provided like she can get over the border, which she cannot do, but Oscar probably can.
Yes. And this is sort of like the ethical act that Oscar's able to do. Not write the piece. He's able to help Rosa Amalfitano.
One person.
Yeah, one person. Yeah. And even then, in situations that are like, as we've been saying, like hard to exactly pin down, but that she is still at risk. But it's like we haven't exactly been seeing anything. It's all like implied. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, Rosa is like presumed like, I don't want to be like, oh, she's evil, but she's involved in this somehow. I mean, we don't know for sure. Like maybe she was a potential victim, but she might not be. Well, she might know more than she's letting on. Who knows?
And like as they're leaving,
I don't have like textual evidence for that, but just like we don't know. We don't. She does not say a lot about her own involvement or her own like plans for the future.
Yeah. So. At that moment, Fate remembered his appointment with Guadalupe Ronsal, which we're going to talk about in a second. Does it have to do with the killings, he asked. Do you think this Chucho Flores is mixed up in it? In that? They're all mixed up in it, says Amalfitano. So yeah, everyone is mixed up in it in some way. And then while they were in the car on the way to the Santa Teresa prison, Rosa said no one had answered the phone at her father's after she called Amalfitano several times. Rosa had called Rosa Mendez's house, and there was no one there either. I think Rosa's dead, she said. Fate shook his head as if he couldn't believe it. We're still alive, he said. We're alive because we haven't seen anything and we don't know anything, said Rosa. So yeah, like I think you're right in that like Rosa may be somehow aware of something, but somehow they've escaped from what it could feel like at the end here.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, like, again, crucially, yes, they have not seen anything.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's interesting that Bolaño is still resisting the urge to even like have Rosa like report something she saw or something she heard about. And maybe that is like the ultimate like proof of the fact like that she is an innocent, that she is worthy of being saved in some way. I don't know. Rosa's a kind of a slippery character, I feel. I don't mean that in like a sense where like, oh, she's evil. Just like Bolaño doesn't give us her internality. Which I noticed he's very resistant to writing from women's perspectives.
Yeah. In fact, I can only really think of one short story of his called Murdering Whores. And you think it's going to be about one thing, but it's actually about a woman monologuing to a man that she's got tied up to a chair that she's about to kill because she has essentially convinced this man to sleep with her in order to kill him. And so it's suddenly revealed in that story that like, oh, this guy's going to die and that she's monologuing. It's not something else. So I'm sure he's got other ones, but that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. So
yeah. But I don't know. That is striking to me at this. And I mean, this is a book about how men treat women at some level. Yeah. So that's not a critique exactly. But it is something interesting about his, for someone who wrote so much, like it is interesting that there are so few points where he is willing to take that step.
Yeah, and even Amalfitano's wife is kind of reported as if from Amalfitano's perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah. But well, and so then we should mention the last plot point, which is that Guadalupe Ronsal is going to meet with somebody that they believe has been committing the murders, and she wants Oscar to go with her. I think before they leave, I think they're going to do that, and then they leave. I think. To cross the border. I also like that when they're crossing the border guards are like, why is this white woman traveling with this black man? And so like there's like this, it's like you can feel the like the racism of America take hold at the border essentially, and then luckily
all of a sudden, this is like a weird thing now.
Yeah. Whereas before it wasn't. So yeah,
it was weird in a different way.
Right. Yeah. So then they go to the prison, and then in again a sort of another anticlimactic moment. It's like you can hear the guy walking down the hall. It's like a giant's walking. Fate thinks I'm a giant. The voice grew louder. It occurred to Fate that he might still be dreaming. The trees fell one by one. I'm a giant lost in the middle of a burned forest, but someone will come to rescue me. Good morning, said the giant in Spanish. He sat down and stretched his legs on the table so that his feet stuck out the other side. He was wearing black tennis shoes and white socks. Guadalupe Runsall took a step back. Ask whatever you want, said the giant. Guadalupe Runsall raised her hand to her mouth as if she were inhaling a toxic gas, and she couldn't think what to ask. So, like, again, it cuts off right there. Like we're going to see what happens in the next section, but we're right before one of the killers, or maybe the killer, because, again, we don't know, although we're told there's multiple killers, is about to talk to Guadalupe Runsall. So,
yeah. Which feels very relevant because the next part is the part about the crimes.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's not something where it's going to directly follow from that point, but that is kind of the sleight of hand here. It's a weird way to end it.
I know, right? I remember the first time I read it, I think I felt myself like ascending when I could tell that like, oh, we're not going to get any closure again. Like I could just feel myself like ascending as I was reading the book. It's like the giant's walking down the hall, like because he's described as being a very tall man, the killer they have. So yeah, but.
Yeah, this whole section is weird.
Yeah.
The like more I've thought about it, the more I'm kind of like, was any of this real? Or is all of this just Oscar Fate like dreaming, more or less?
Well, and that's something that I had asked you out original, and I think this is a good point to end on, which is like if this is a dream like scenario, what does it mean that like Oscar of the people we've seen is the only person to do something, but he's only really able to save one person in slightly dubious circumstances? Like, what does it mean that there's a dream? What is it like? I think we've done a good job of mentioning like why Oscar is the character to do this, but like, what does the dream element of this do? Does it gel well with the crime element? And, in having the hotel clerk who seems incredibly knowledgeable about film, tell Oscar Fate, and they talk about David Lynch seems significant. We live inside a dream of Oscar Fate, but it's like, well, there's still like real things that are like happening here, and that like art has a way of talking about what's processing. Like, I don't know, it's like an incredibly thorny section. And again, I think in the past I just read it very quickly and was like, so anticlimax. But I think there's a lot of like weird themes being interwoven in here. So
I have an idea. And I'm going to preface my idea by saying, spoiler warning for Twin Peaks: The Return.
Yeah, I'll put a little siren noise maybe just to make sure, because I know people don't want to be spoiled about that. So yeah.
Spoiler alert for a nearly 10-year-old show that is a sequel to, at that point, a 15-year-old show.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But so the kind of like final bit of Twin Peaks: The Return is Agent Cooper basically traveling back in time and managing to save Laura Palmer, only to then return to the present and realize that it did not fix the world.
Yeah.
If anything, maybe it made the world worse.
Yeah, he might have doomed her to a perpetuity of pain and suffering. Yeah. So.
But I think that I think what Bolaño is maybe critiquing or thinking about here is kind of the hubris of like the American subject to some degree.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Idealism.
Yeah,
where I don't know if exactly like they're super similar characters, but like Agent Cooper and Fate are both men who think like, oh, I find myself in this world of suffering and pain and horror that is so like far outside of my individual ability to do anything about, that I find myself like paralyzed by it. Yeah. But if I can perform one good act, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's worth it. Maybe I'm redeeming the world by saving this innocent, whether that's Rosa Malfitano or Laura Palmer. I'm thinking also about like Saving Private Ryan, where it's like this idea that it's like, yeah, it's worth it that like 15 guys died so that one guy didn't die. And the sacrifice they do to make that happen like is worthy and good, and like makes it all worth it in the end. There is kind of this, I don't actually know if it's like a uniquely American problem, but it's a problem of the narrative,
right?
The idea that like, because again, you know, outside of maybe some really intense like speculative fiction or like the realm of like religious allegory, you can never have a story where it's like, oh, the protagonist solved all the problems. And if they did, it would probably kind of suck as a story. But you need, the audience demands catharsis, demands an ending that is at least bittersweet for the most part.
Right.
There are very few people anymore who have a taste for just like straight up tragedy with no like sparks of light at the end of the tunnel. And I think what Bolaño is kind of saying here is like, in a world of violence, suffering, and pain, yes, maybe you can save one person. That doesn't erase anything else. That does not redeem the world. It does not set things right. It does not even necessarily move the world towards a better state. All you've done is save one person, and that person may or may not deserve to be saved. You may or may not be the right person to try to do this. It could just be sheer dumb luck that you manage it.
Yeah.
You know, I think that it's important that, like, we haven't talked about it. It's important his name is Fate.
That's true. We have not talked about his name. Yeah.
But it's also actually not his name.
Right, because his real name is Quincy Williams, right? Yeah. And so that's also, I wanted to bring that up to you. I think at some point when I would read this section, I go, oh, I guess he works at the newspaper. It's cool that he has a new name at the newspaper. And then I was like, but what kind of newspaper does that? Like, what are we supposed to think that in this narrative, his real name is Quincy Williams, but he becomes Oscar Fate in this narrative? Does that mean it's a dream? Does that mean he has like a detective name? Does that mean that like this is, again, as you were saying, a narrative that's designed to give specific answers to these questions, some of which can be satisfying and other ones can't? I don't know. It's like, again, I feel like it's the most Lynchian that like in like Mulholland Drive, it's like you could collapse the dream thing into the real thing, or it's more the case with Lynch that they both exist in this weird relationship to each other. And so that like there's aspects that are real and dreamlike, and they're equally in play here, as opposed to there being like what's quote unquote really going on, which is just Quincy Williams is at home at his mom's apartment and he's asleep on the couch and he's dreamed this whole thing basically. So
yeah. You know, it's interesting, Ben, you know, you bring up Mulholland Drive because listeners, for those of you who are not into the deep lore, years and years ago, Ben and I had an abortive attempt to start a podcast, and one of the episodes was talking about Mulholland Drive. And I feel like we were pretty immature. We were like 19, 20 years old at the time.
Yeah, this is our lost media. Yeah.
And I feel like we had a super facile read on that movie. We gave like the very straightforward, like this part's the dream, this part's real, this is how they relate to each other reading, because this was like when there were like 15 podcasts in the world and you didn't have to be good at anything or say anything of value to make a podcast.
Oh yeah, listeners, let us know if you want to hear the lost media of this podcast. Maybe we'll make it available in some way. So yeah.
But I think that like Bolaño is doing what I think Lynch at his best is doing, where again, it is not a puzzle box. It is not that like we could sit down and like we could read this section 10 more times, and Bolaño is not inviting us to do that and try to like figure out like Ooh, have you solved all my riddles? Have you gotten all my clues? Now you know the real truth of the part about fate. These things exist in tension with each other on purpose.
Right.
They are deliberately ambiguous because Bolaño is asking us to ask questions about narrative and about reality and about like experience and perception in a way that like I don't think he has clean answers for himself.
Right.
Again, to go back to those monologues.
Yeah.
There is an element of this book where it is Bolaño, I think, again, at the end of his life, trying to make sense of the world and his place in it, and kind of coming up with like, here are my ideas. I don't necessarily even think I'm right about them, but this is the best I can give you.
Right. Yeah. This is the sort of tensions I can outline as something addressing this problem, but I don't have all the answers. So, yeah.
And like, I think that shows like his talent as a writer, the fact that he is able to kind of hold these things like in tension with each other and not give into the temptation to do like a facile like puzzle box style reading of them. And I think that it shows a lot of humility to not be like, there are a lot of writers who come at novel writing as a way of standing on a soapbox and pontificating and telling you exactly what they think about the world and about life, and why you should agree with them. And Bolaño has more humility than that. I guess being tortured by Pinochet will do that to you.
Well, and also I think being an exile in some way gives you some perspectives on stuff. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. But I think, this section, it's not my favorite part thus far. I think that I still like the part about the critics best just because it was the part that I found the most fun to read on like a page to page level.
Yeah.
But I think that this is the part that definitely like shows Bolaño as a writer in the strongest way.
And I think on this read, I am more aware of what's going on because I think in the past I had thought this was just kind of like a flat exercise in hard-boiled narration. And I think as we've been outlining, I think there's a lot going on beneath the surface on this. And I think you can read this as like he tries to solve the case and he can maybe do one thing, but I think there's weird themes of perception, art, dreams that are and what we want out of stories that are in this section. And there's a lot more going on than just, Jimmy Lowell got whacked, essentially. So, yeah.
Well, I think that, again, it's why the Lynch comparison is so important. Twin Peaks, at the beginning, it is about who killed Laura Palmer. And then after we find out who killed Laura Palmer, we realize that it has not been about that the whole time. It is about like what is broken in the world.
Right.
Like it's about the problem of evil. It is about the problem of suffering. It is about like what do we do as human beings who find ourselves in a world that seems like tailor-made to not give us clean, concise, happy answers to our questions.
Yeah.
And I think that Bolaño is doing the same thing in 2666. I mean, not exactly the same thing, but it is the same thing in terms of like he is giving us what on the surface appears to be a mystery that is really not about who is killing these women. It is asking like, why is death? Why is suffering? Why is evil? And is there anything to be done about these things?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also a good hint of the next section, which is when it actually shows you everything, so to speak. And it'll be interesting to talk about that when we get there. So
yeah, ooh man, my tummy hurts just thinking about it.
Well, I without getting into spoilers, I like that you brought up the humility because I just want to give a hint that. So I need to look up the actual names. I'm going to have them for that episode. But Bolaño worked with a lot of like actual reporters on the Feministidios, and one of them is just straight up a character in part 4. Like he's just like, this guy is doing the thing that he did in real life, and I used his stuff. And I think that's important moving forward. In that, like, I think in doing what you've been saying, John, I think Bolaño does need help to do that. And I think the way this 4th section looks is a result of that. So.
It's something that, I mean, I admire a lot about Bolaño from what I know of him, what I've read of him, like for being someone who was and is so important to kind of like contemporary literature. I think globally at this point, like not just like Chilean or like Latin American literature. He always seemed, from what I've like read of him, as like an essayist, what I've heard other people say about him, despite writing, again, like a huge number of like amazing novels and poems that are beloved across the world now. Incredibly humble guy, like did not think he was above like doing what he did not like you said, he was writing fiction hoping to like pay his bills basically and like leave money for his family. But you can't tell that this was written like with the idea of like, oh man, I really need a paycheck. Like he puts his whole goddamn Roberto Bolaño into this. Roberto,
that's true.
Bolaño.
As much as it pains me to say it, it's true.
Say it, Ben.
No, I'm not going to say. You already said it. It's fine. Yes, I agree.
But yeah, I don't know. I the more we read of Bolaño, the more it's tragic he passed like relatively young.
Yeah.
If 2666 is what he put out like right before he died, like I wonder what this book could have looked like if he'd just lived longer and maybe been able to like give it like another pass.
Well, yeah, like he said he wanted to do. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's amazing, don't get me wrong, but you do feel like there is something unfinished here. Even just in the parts we've read, it does feel like there's just something that isn't quite fully developed in the way that maybe some of his other stuff we've read has been.
Especially
also,
since,
I mean, like, again, if this is what you're writing right before you die, and you died at like in like your early 50s, like he could have had like another all-time great book in him that we just never will get.
Right. And I mean, and Savage Detectives is pretty great, but there's an interesting way in which that book kind of sprawls. And then he, of course, closes it. But like, I think he's either good at he has this like really great contained stuff, or he just writes this big sprawling thing. And I mean, with Savage Detectives, he technically wrote 2. So it's like, I think he did do pretty good, but I also agree, like what could have been, we'll never know. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that just given, I mean, not saying like, I'm not saying like, I wish Roberto Bolaño was like around to like clap back at Trump on Twitter, but I don't know. He is like the type of voice that like I wish was around like right now.
Yeah.
I feel like he would have interesting and profound things to say about the violence we're seeing in America and elsewhere in the world right now. Not that he could have changed it, or like we wouldn't, we wouldn't be having this stuff if Roberto Bolaño was alive. But it's just it's a shame to see someone really kind of pass in, what seemed to be their prime.
Well, I mean, he was waiting for a liver transplant, and he died before he could get it. So yeah,
fuck cancer.
Yeah, fuck cancer. Yeah.
Yeah. Oof. I did find the title of that article, so I did just want to plug that before we kind of close up for the evening. It is Global Forms in Bolaño's 2666, Genre, Race, Capital by Jack Weijia Cao.
That sounds great.
Published in Critique in 2024.
Oh, man, pretty recent.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I meant to send it to you because I wanted, I thought you would enjoy it. He mostly talks about the part about the critics.
Well, you had mentioned Allegory of the Cave. It was, so that was, you had called that. So yeah, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Ben, anything else you want to say about the part about fate before we wrap up? I think we're getting like near 2 hours. So.
Yeah. I'll just a quick recap. I do think this part has a lot going on, more so than I thought before. And it was nice to get it very slowly. And I think sort of discerning the kind of dream reality structure and what that says about like the way we make sense of these problems, I think is pretty interesting. And I also think that it's clear that I think Bolaño had to jump forms to keep going in this. And we'll see what that looks like when we return.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will be back in 2 weeks with an episode. We're going to take a little bit of a break before we really descend into the underworld to read Mo Yan's Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out, a book which begins with a literal descent into hell. But it's funny.
Yeah, John, I was laughing doing it in my head the 5 parts about Mo Yan's book in 2666, where it's like the part about being a pig, the part about being reincarnated as this animal, the part about being a donkey. Like, and I was actually like listed that way, but I know it's different, and that's that doesn't quite apply. But I've got 2666 on the brain, so
no, absolutely. I mean, hard not to. I feel like it's interesting that we've. This season feels like it's ended up being John and Ben's long hot summer. Where it's just like we just kind of happened to pick a bunch of really fucked up, dark, scary books, like evil books.
Well, that's what summer reading is for, when you can just really go crazy and read something that you feel like you don't have time for elsewhere. So yeah.
All right. Well, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Until then, you know where to find the show. You know where to find us. Really appreciate everyone listening. We hope you are enjoying this series on 2666. And we hope you're ready to laugh in a month when we get to part 4, which is part 3 of this series. About part 4 of this book.
Till then.
Libros siempres.
Libros siempres.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.